You're not getting the crazy Frank today. You're getting the good one because I just started my meds again. Off my meds, I'm a little out there.
When did you first start taking?
When I was a kid.
So tell me about your childhood.
My childhood. I grew up in San Diego. I was born and raised. I was born in Sharp Memorial Hospital. I was born with the cord wrapped around my neck, so I was pronounced dead when I was born. So I had to be put in an incubator. And if it wasn't, my father wasn't there. He was getting high at the time. I guess he showed up later on. But if it wasn't for my grandfather, I probably wouldn't be alive because he threatened the doctor's life to keep me alive. So he kept me alive, and I was in an incubator for a long time, and I had to have major blood transfusions, and a lot of things happened when I was born to me. So right there's a miracle in my life, you know. I always look back at that and go, man, you know, when I get mad that I'm here, I think back at that. I'm supposed to be here, you know. And how I ended up here today is, you know, I had dreams and I had goals in my life, and I was a motivated person my whole life, you know. And I don't know exactly how I got here to this point in my life. I'm 44 years old. I shouldn't have made it past probably 20 years old, honestly, if you want to know the truth. I've been a millionaire twice over with the work that I do. I've owned my own businesses. I've worked for huge power companies that paid me god-awful amounts of money for not doing hardly anything, which has a lot to do with my mental illness. There was a lot of electricity. I've been electrocuted a couple times from high voltage. I've been run through a rock crusher and almost killed twice from the electricity and the rock crusher. And the companies just threw it under the table, hid it. And I'm a loyal person, so I never sued anybody. I was never a person who wanted to sue and gain something that I didn't earn, right? So going back to my childhood, I was raised in San Diego. We're Native American. We have some Mexican in us. We have Aztec blood in us. We have a lot of family members, a lot of friends that are from deep down in Mexico. We are Kumeyaay natives, but our family was kicked out of the Kumeyaay Mission Indian tribe, so the Yaqui Mission Indians picked us up from Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. So they recognized us as Yaqui because we were kicked out of the Kumeyaay for political purposes and reasons, probably for money, I would imagine, right? So how I grew up is, I remember being 3 years old, riding on an airplane up to Sacramento. My grandparents and my uncle worked for a company called The Company, so which was always weird to me. And when they didn't have work, when I was 4 or 5 years old, my grandpa would put me in the garage. They have a huge shop, and he'd have me sand cars down, old 54s, 56s, 57 Chevys, bunch of gangster cars, bunch of Plymouths, everything you could think of. So I learned how to work on cars at a young age, you know, and at a young age, my grandfather was pretty much the one that was raising me. And he would take me to work with him a lot, so I learned how to do a lot of different trades. I learned how to do asphalt, concrete, grading, paving, everything you could think of. I learned at a very young age. So my grandfather was pretty much my father. My father had left when I was 6 years old. Him and my mother decided to get a divorce. My father is he's on the spectrum. He's got Asperger's. He was a genius. He built computers pretty much before computers were even how they are today. You know, he would take them apart and put and solder everything together, the circuit boards, make everything. And he knew numbers real well, you know, just like I do. You know, and I never understood it until now, right? But what I remember as a child is I remember being around my father and watching him do drugs with his friends. I'd watch him smoke weed. I'd watch him do coke. I'd watch him drink. Every picture you see of me as a child, someone's holding me with a Budweiser, smoking a cigarette or a joint, you know. I remember him and my mother playing tug of war with me a few times. The one would grab my right arm and left arm and pull me, and it was pretty abusive, you know. And finally, when my father left, I clinged to my grandfather because that was the next man in my family. But throughout the years, I yearned for my father. I wanted a father. I wanted to play catch. I never got to play catch with anybody with a football or a baseball or anything. It was all about work, you know, in school. And so pretty much I was raised by my grandfather. And when I was with my mother, she was young. You know, she had me when she was 20. Yeah, she had me when she was 20. And so back at that time, our part of the family was poor, my mother and I. But my other side of the family, you could kind of compare them to the mafia. The families ran like the mafia, kind of. It was ran by my uncle. He's passed away now. His name's Tom C. Dyke. I will give that name because it's a very important name in my family. He was one of the people that I looked up to the most, how he handled the family and handled the money and everything. So, you know, I lived on the streets with my mother. We lived in our cars sometimes. We would move house to house to house. I can't even tell you how many times that I moved. And we would live in the crappiest apartments. We would live in the car. We would live wherever we could. We would live at my grandmother's house. So we finally moved into this apartment in Lakeside. And I'll never forget, I was riding my bike, and I rode my bike into the garage, and my mom must have had shut the garage door, and it closed on my forehead and knocked me out. Got a concussion, had to go to the hospital. If you look closely, there's still a scar in my head from it. That was when I was like 8 years old. And so we started living at that apartment. My mother met this man named Jim, which is my stepfather today, still is. And I remember things back before that. When I was a kid, there was a lot of witchcraft in my family. One of my aunts practiced dark Santeria, and we lived at her house a lot. That was when my dad was still with us. So I saw a lot of things. I saw a lot of weird things that is hard to explain. You know, I would see her witchcraft stuff set up, and I would see things in the windows at night. I would see demons, if you want to call them demons. I would see figures, and I was just a kid, mind that. And we had pet goats. You know, we had pet goats, and I had tied them up one night. I think we had 6 of them, and they were tied to a tree. And I woke up one morning, and they were all slaughtered. Everything. All their insides were taken out, and just their skin and bones were left. And we looked around. I remember we looked around for footprints. We didn't see nothing. There was no sign of struggle, nothing. So anyways, my mother decided, since all that stuff was happening there, she decided to move us out. And that's when we moved to my grandma's. And then when we moved to the apartment and my father left, and my mother met this man named Jim. Well, about a year or two later, my stepfather goes into the 7-Eleven and gets a quick pick, and he gets it 1 minute before they cut off the time for the lottery, right? And they won the lottery. He won the lottery. He won $5.6 million in the lottery. So I go from living in cars to living in Logan Heights in the barrio, and, you know, at everybody's house, couch surfing with my mom and this and that, to all of a sudden we have a nice house, you know, we have nice cars. And that went on till about, I was 14 years old. But in the meantime, I had gone to a junior high school, and my 8th grade year, at the beginning of my 8th grade year, I got on the bus, and I remember this Hispanic kid getting on the bus, and he had flashed a gun to me. And I said, that's weird. Why would this kid be flashing a gun to me? So we get to school that day, and I had to go to the bathroom. I was in my math class, and I remember my teacher, Mrs. Villavada. I raised my hand. I said, could I please use the restroom? And she said, yeah, go to the restroom. I went to the restroom, and I'm taking a pee in the urinal, and I noticed someone walked in, and I saw the reflection of that kid that flashed me the gun in the bus come in the bathroom, and I saw him pull out the gun. So I just started to act like I'm peeing. As soon as he got up close to me, I turned around and grabbed the gun out of his hand and pistol whipped him with it and knocked him out on the ground and got on top of him and started to beat him. And of course the principal walks in. So it looks like I had the gun and I was beating this guy. We ended up both getting expelled, but they both ended up finding out the truth. And to this day, no one knows why that this guy brought a gun to kill me with, right? So in junior high, now we have a little bit of money. My mother and stepfather have money. I started dating this girl. I dated a Playboy model. I can't say her name. She was, I think, centerfold for April of 99, I think, or 98. Her first name is Julia. That's all I'll say. And I dated a girl named Rose. And I think that he was mad at me because I was dating a Hispanic woman. I have no idea what his deal was. But that point changed my life, I think, forever. The first time I smoked weed is I went to a party at the beginning of the 8th grade year, right before that had happened. And I grew up with a lot of known people. I grew up with a guy that drives the number 48 NASCAR. I'm sure you know who that is. His brother was one of my best friends, and he's the one that gave me my first joint. And I remember what shirt he has on. He was wearing a Metallica. He was wearing a Metallica Kill 'Em All shirt. I'll never forget it to this day. I remember his face, handed me the joint, and I took a hit. And you know what? After that joint, that was about it for drugs for a while. I ended up getting expelled from school. My mother got me a homeschool teacher, and my homeschool teacher was he was a guitar instructor. So we really didn't do any school. I didn't learn how to play guitar. He taught me music. He taught me how to read music. He taught me how, my favorite band back then was Guns N' Roses, Pennywise, and NWA. So I had rock, I had punk rock, and some rap. So he ended up teaching me the blues, and I loved it. It took a lot of the hurt I had from being molested when I was younger. I was molested when I was young, at about 6 years old, by a friend of mine that was older than me. And then after my parents won the lottery, I got molested again, and no one knew about it. And I didn't talk about that till I worked at a rehab when I was 33 years old in front of a bunch of guys. So I kept it secret that whole time. So anyways, after my mother and father got the money, we had a lot of nice Christmases. I can't complain. It was cool. It was weird. It was different for me, But the kicker is we ended up going to Vegas a lot. So there was about 4 or 5 years where I grew up in Vegas. We stayed in Vegas for months at a time, 3 to 4 months at a time. As soon as the Mirage got built, my mom made friends with Steve Wynn, the owner of a bunch of hotel and casinos. Now she's still friends with him to this day. And so they would give me $100 and stick me in an arcade by myself. And I would sit there all day, and once I got bored of the arcade, I'd walk down the strip. I'd walk over to Caesar's Palace because there was magic shops. I loved magic. I loved magicians. I loved card tricks. I loved cards. I loved to play cards. So I learned how to walk the streets of Vegas and learned all the hustles and stuff. By watching magic, I learned sleight of hand. So I would walk by blackjack tables or poker tables and grab $100 chips. And back then they didn't have the security systems like they do now, you know? So no one ever really caught me, and I'd always give my grandpa the chips. And where'd you get those? Well, don't worry about it. Just go cash them in, you know? I laugh because I think back, it's pretty funny now, you know? They were teaching me how to be a hustler. Here's $100 while we go and do what we do in Vegas. And we would do this for months, 3-4 months out of every year. So I grew to live by myself, kind of on my own. I was basically a latchkey kid when it came down to it. During the summers, we would go up to Auburn. There's a place up by Auburn, way up in the hills, where my grandfather and my uncle worked. They built dams and did all this stuff up there for the company. And I remember just being a little guy, and my grandfather would give me a gun. He'd give me a 22 long barrel, a knife, and a fishing pole. And I'd walk in that forest by myself every day. He'd teach me how to hunt by myself. He would teach me how to butcher, how to skin things, how to clean the fish, how to do all this stuff. And he had how many brothers? He had 1, 2, 3, 4. He had 5 brothers. The one brother was a butcher, so they taught me at a young age how to butcher cattle, how to butcher pigs, how to make our own meat. But growing up, I remember I was always by myself, you know. So when I started school, it was hard for me to fit in because I was by myself. I didn't know how to interact with other kids, you know. So I always was trying to be somebody that I really wasn't, you know. I was really smart. I never had to study for any tests. I never had to do anything to pass school. I just passed because I knew I could take the test and ace the test, no problem. And everybody, you like, what the heck? You don't study, you don't do your homework, you don't do nothing. I said, I don't know. So then when I got in high school, my mother, since they had the money, put me into a Christian school. I went to Christian High in El Cajon. Dr. Jeremiah Shadow Mountain Church. It's a big church down there. And so I got a background in the Judeo-Christian religion, which I hated right off the bat. I fought it right off the bat. You know, I'd go in these Bible classes and listen to this guy preach on what he thought was the right doctrine of the Bible, and I always called him out on it. I said, no, that's not what that says, and that's not what that means, man. Why are you teaching us this? So the more I did that, the more they started catching on to me. So I ended up in the principal's office with my desk in there, and that's where I stayed all 4 years so I could play football. So during high school, I didn't do any drugs, no drinking, nothing. My outlet was sports, right? And my freshman year, my grandfather had died. I was 14, and that devastated me. It devastated my whole family. It ruined my mother's life. It ruined my life to a point. But right before that, we went on a trip. We went all around the country, probably to every state. I think we missed 3 or 4 states. But I got to spend some time with him, and he actually took me to see my father. No one else wanted to take me to see my father. At this time, my father got banished from San Diego. His father, my other grandfather, my white grandfather, was a bank robbery cop, undercover. So he caught my father stealing a bunch of stuff from stores and banks. I hear banks, but I don't know if I believe that. So instead of the judge putting him in prison, he told my grandfather that he could be banished from California for so many years. I think it was 7 to 10 years, something like that. So before my grandfather had passed away, he made me a promise that he would take me to see my dad, and he did. We went and saw my dad in Virginia, and we got back from that trip, and my grandfather ended up passing away, and he had cirrhosis of the liver so bad, his liver, by the time we got him down, we tried to get him shark treatment down in Rosarito, or Ensenada, and his liver was just the size of a dime, so there wasn't much they could do anymore. And I'll never forget the day that he passed away. I was sitting in there by myself with him, and he looked at me and he said, "Frankie, you see those doves up there?" And I said, "No." And he goes, "Those are angels. They're coming to get me." And I said, "Okay, whatever you say." So we left that night, got home. I hear a scream about, I think it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was my mother screaming. I ran in there and she goes, Grandpa passed away. And I remember just my whole world sink, you know? That was my whole world. That was who I looked at as a dad. That's who I looked at. It taught me how to be a man, right? So after that, I was pretty much raised by my grandmother, sometimes my mother, you know, but I missed my grandpa. I missed that. So I ended up getting a lot of letters or scholarships for football, and I was a good athlete. I was wide receiver and a free safety, and I turned those down because I knew how to work. You know, I knew how to make money, and I already had a job. I was making, I think, $1,500 to $1,700 a week at 17 years old. So why do I need to go to college? You know, I was already hustling. I knew how to hustle. You know, I knew how to hustle. I was raised a hustler. My mother was a hustler. You know, so what I ended up doing was I went and signed up for the SEALs, for the Navy SEALs, with a couple of friends, and I ended up backing out, and those same two friends are Navy SEALs today, and I still talk to one of them, and I always think, man, I should have done that, but you know what? Coulda, woulda, shoulda. I'm right here because I'm supposed to be right here, you know? So it's about that time when I started partying. I think I was 17 and a half. I graduated early because I was young. I graduated with honors, so I could have went to any college I wanted to, but I chose to work. So all that cash I was getting, I was so young, I was making so much money. I was the one that had the half kilo of Coke. I was the one that had whatever you wanted. Let's have fun. Let's go to the desert. Let's go to the river. Let's party. So we started partying and drinking, and you know what? My mom, at this time, I was just starting to move out of my mother's house. They built a huge mansion from the lottery money, and let me backtrack a little bit. My mother opened a jewelry store, helped a lot of our family, bought them some houses, bought them cars, opened a business, the jewelry store, so she could help the family that needed work. So they started working for her. That ended up being a wash. It ended up closing down a few years later. So during football, back in high school, I broke my leg, which I started doing opiates. They gave me pills. I didn't know it at this time, but I started getting addicted to that stuff. And my mother even told me, she goes, "Frank, you're going to have a long road in life. You're going to battle addiction like your father did." And I never really listened to her. So anyways, go forward. She ended up gambling most of the money away, allegedly. So we were back to having nothing. So then my mother started, I don't want to incriminate my mother because she's still in the system, but she did some things to me and my wife at the time. Now I'm married. Me and my wife at the time, she borrowed some money and never gave it back, which kind of ruined my marriage. And she did some things where she got caught some years later and got put in prison for it. She just got out, and I don't blame her for that. She kept food on the table for my half-sisters. Or I don't call them my half-sisters, they're my sisters. She had to do what she had to do. But on the other hand, now I was caught up in heroin. I was doing crystal meth. I did meth since I started doing meth at 17, 18 years old. And I did it for up until last year, you know? The heroin, and the Oxycontins only lasted till about 2012. I've had long-term sobriety. I've had 7 years. I went and learned about the addiction and understood that my addiction, the drugs and alcohol weren't the problem. That was the solution to my problem. I took a lot of psychology classes. I took a lot of classes to get my KDAC so I could be a counselor and rehabs. And I did. I worked at a couple rehabs. But then my mental illness started getting predominant, and I started noticing it. So finally, my second wife took me in, and they diagnosed me with paranoid schizophrenia. They diagnosed me with bipolar disorder. They said, you're on the spectrum. They said they didn't know what I had. They said I probably have Asperger's because I'm very good with numbers. I can see numbers and tell you what they are. But in the meantime, we grew up with a lot of Hell's Angels, a lot of Peckerwoods. They were kind of like our family. They were always around. So the second rehab that I went to, the first one I went to was just for alcoholism. The second one was for heroin addiction. And my mother took me there to a place to eat for my birthday, and then she was going to take me to rehab. So I went in the bathroom to take a pee, and a patched angel grabs me and goes, Frank. He hugs me, holds me. I'll never forget it. Held me as tight as he could. He goes, Frank, stay alive, man. Stay alive. And I didn't understand it. And I came out of the bathroom. I said, Mom, did you set that up? And she just looked at me and smiled. And that didn't happen once. It happened 3 times. Now, they were upset at me for using heroin because they knew heroin was going to kill me, right? They didn't say much about the meth. But ultimately what the meth did was kicked off the diseases I already had, and it turned to paranoid schizophrenia, right? I'm sure you hear a lot of those stories. So it's almost like it was set up for me perfectly to go get help to get off heroin. So I went up to this place, Palomar Mountain, after I've been to rehab many times and many detoxes. I've been to rehab 19 times in my life. Spent millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, then millions of dollars obviously in insurance money. But the 2 that actually helped, or the 3 that actually helped, were Palomar Mountain, called Sober Ranch, Genesis Recovery, which is down by where I live, and Alter Group up here in Orange County. But I'll never forget, I worked for the power companies. I was working, and this guy came up to me, and he was a Mongol, and I knew he was a Mongol, and he was always a jerk to me, and he had told me something about, say hi to your mom. I miss having sex with her, right? And I looked at him, and I'm older now, and I said, I wouldn't say that if I was you. 2 months later, that guy's dead. I can't explain it. I don't know what happened. He's dead. He was dead. Showed up dead. They said he drove his bike off a bridge. And there's a lot of things like that has happened in my life that are unexplainable, that almost like it's all been set up. I've always been kept safe by somebody, Now I've been arrested many times, been in jail many times. Now when I get arrested, or if I get arrested, God forbid I do anymore, they don't take me to jail. They have to take me to the psych ward because of what I'm diagnosed with. So what I wanted to come talk to you about is the mental illness. Drugs are the solution to the mental illness and how we were brought up and raised. I try to fill that darkness and that void with the drugs and alcohol, or whatever it is. It could be more than, it could be working out too much. It could be, whatever. I just want people to be aware that it's just a solution, man. That's not the problem. We have to talk to somebody, and we have to let people know that what the government's doing out here is not right. I mean, fentanyl's killing people. They don't even bring up ketamine, which ketamine's killing a lot of people too. I spent a lot of time on the streets. I lived on the streets for years. I watched people get murdered for a $10 sack of heroin. I've seen so many things that kids shouldn't see, and I'm thankful to be alive today. I've done a lot of things that I regret, but do I really regret them? No, it's made me the man I am today. It's made me be able to talk about it. It's made me be able to talk about my molestations to other men that have the same problem, that need to hear somebody talk about it. Does it haunt me every day? Hell yes, it haunts me every day. Every day of my life, it haunts me. I wake up. People talk about triggers. What triggers you? See, you learn all this stuff, all these rehabs you go to. What triggers you? You know what? I'm triggered when I open my damn eyes in the morning, right? That's when I'm triggered. And I heard someone say one time, that it's just business. It's just business. It's not pleasure. It's just a business of the game. But I honestly, the more of us that talk about this kind of stuff, the more we're going to shed light on the darkness that they don't want us to talk about. And you know who they are. So, I watched the Skid Row stuff. We got Skid Row in San Diego just like LA. It's getting just as bad, And my favorite thing to do is to go on them streets. I give my last dollar to someone because you know what? They did it for me. I'll go buy a guy a beer because he did it for me. So my agenda in life is to help others like me. Just like your agenda, I think it's important that we speak out against all the BS that we're taught and that they show us on TV and that they tell us. It's all BS, man. I grew up with a lot of cartel members, and I'll tell you what, some of them are the nicest people you'll ever meet. Honest to God, some Hells Angels are the nicest people you'll ever meet in your life, and they help so many people that no one ever gives them the benefit of the doubt because the stigma surrounding them, right? Just like the people on the streets. Probably the most smartest, intelligent people you'll ever meet live on those streets, And people don't give them a chance, and that's why they don't want nothing to do with this BS. They don't want to pay the taxes to a government that isn't even a government or a U.S. entity, right? Screw them. Why do that when they're not letting us speak out? I want to shed light on the darkness of this world. I want to do the best I can to keep the fentanyl, to keep ketamine, to keep all the drugs that kill off the streets. I understand that some of us need certain things to stay alive, but we've been programmed that way, and we need to reprogram ourselves. We need to reprogram ourselves and see the light and quit looking at that darkness, because there is a light, man. There is a light, and I'll do whatever I can to help change this world. So thanks for listening.
All right. Frank, thank you so much.